In this video, I'm going to talk about why I don't use Sony cameras. Whenever you watch a YouTube video about a lens or a gimbal or even a mic system these days, it seems that at least 80% of the time, the reviewer will be using a Sony camera. And that's fair enough. Sony make excellent products. But I don't use Sony mirrorless cameras, or even Sony camcorders for that matter. So why not? Well, here's some of the main reasons why I don't use Sony cameras. A lot of people complain about the colors from a Sony camera. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with Sony cameras. I occasionally do shoot with a colleague who uses an older FS5, which I believe came out around 2015. And whenever we shoot with that camera, I have to admit I'm not a fan of the colors. Skin always looks a little grey or greenish and just looks a little, I don't know, washed out or something. I'm not overly keen on it. S-Log 3 is considered by many to be one of the more difficult log profiles to work with, and from the limited experience I've had, I've found it also the least forgiving and the most fussy. And it's another common complaint with Sony cameras. Yet another common complaint I hear, and I've also got, because I've not been a fan of Sony menus either. Nothing seems to be where it should be, and they look pretty messy and kind of amateur to me. Now, to be fair, they have improved their menu system a lot, even way back since the A7 IV, and they seem to be, or at least people are saying, that they're more logical now and more user-friendly. And in fact, some of the newer cameras, like the A7 V, have a slightly updated version again, and their menus seem to be pretty good. So this might be an older complaint. I know the menu on the FS5 is pretty terrible. Every time we use that camera, we're always trying to figure out where was that again, and it's just, yeah, it just doesn't seem to make sense. And I've had camera assistants work with me who say the same thing. They hate working with Sony cameras for that reason. So yeah, I think the menu systems, although vastly improved over the last couple of years, still aren't great on Sony cameras. This is actually a big issue for me, and I haven't really heard anyone else talk about it, so maybe it's only me. But one of the biggest problems I have with Sony cameras is that they only let you shoot in some flavor of AVC. Now, I've had a lot of issues with AVC HD over the years, especially in the early years when I first started going digital and so forth. And I'm not really a big fan of these type of formats. The file structure is not very robust, or at least it doesn't seem to be, or at least it never used to be. And these files can copy over badly, rendering the whole entire file and the whole day's shoot useless. And they aren't very user-friendly either. All the files seem to be wrapped up in some bundle, and you can't just copy files for one day's shoot over to a drive individually and manage them separately without going through some sort of editing software. Because if you shoot, say, 2 or 3 days in a row and you don't back up and reformat your cards, everything just remains in the same container, and you can't tell, unless you bring it into an editing suite, what day shoots are what. And I've actually come across this where I've, shot on my Canons and my Lumix cameras, and I had a colleague shooting on his Sony, and we've gone to just dump over the footage to the client's drive, and I can leave my footage on my cards and just sort by date, grab my MOV or MP4 files, put them across for him, and then we get the Sony card and it's like, the last 3 days are on there, and I don't know, I can't just give you today's footage or whatever. So, especially if he shot another job, if he shot like 2 or 3 jobs and then he's come to the new job and forgot to format the card. So then I'm like, oh, okay, so we've got 2 other jobs on here and yours. I can't sort them very easily. I'm going to have to open up Final Cut, go through, render them out, and so on. Basically, it's just very annoying, and I just hate these kind of files. And as far as I can tell, the AVC format is kind of the same in terms of quality as an MP4 or an MOV, especially an MOV in 10-bit. So it's not really an advantage. And as far as I can tell, no Sony cameras, or at least the Pro or semi-Pro ones, allow you to shoot in anything other than some kind of AVC. I think some of their lower end camcorders for consumers do. They have an MP4 option as well, but you just can't do it on the professional cameras, and that's honestly one of my biggest issues with Sony cameras. Now, Lumix are known for a lot of generous updates to every model of camera, and they keep pushing their cameras for 2, 3, even 4 years after they've been released. My S5 II is essentially a completely different camera now than when I bought it just over 2 years ago. It's had at least 3 or 4 fairly decent firmware updates. And it's great that Lumix do keep pushing their cameras on their older cameras further and further, so you can get so much more out of them. But Sony are notorious for their lack of firmware updates and seem to prefer to release a new camera every few months as a way of getting new features into the market rather than updating their older cameras when they can. Now, this frustrates a lot of Sony users, and a lot of people do complain about this, and when they do release a firmware update, well, it's likely to brick your camera, and that doesn't give you much confidence. Well, video assist features, or lack of them. Again, this is improving, and Sony have released some updates to their older cameras to give features like shutter angle and some open gate, I think, but it's taken years for them to do it. Now, I mentioned this briefly in my S5 II Pros video, and that is a lot of Sony cameras seem to waste the space on the left-hand side of the viewfinder. Now, this is the A7 IV versus the S5 II, and you can see quite clearly on the left-hand side there's no drive dial, there's no buttons, there's nothing there on the A7 IV, and I believe it's exactly the same on the A7 V. Now, this isn't a big deal, I guess, but I prefer this space to be used for something useful like a photo drive dial, or at least a few extra buttons that you can customize. Now, this, as you probably know, is a big one for me. Bang for buck. What do you get for your money? And for some reason, whether it's just because everyone's using them, or they've got the brand recognition, or the most lenses, or whatever it is, Sony cameras are always more expensive than other cameras in their so-called price point. And they often come with far less features than other cameras at the same price, or even lower. And this is definitely true with Lumix. Bang for buck, Lumix cameras win every time. Anyway, as I said, these are just my opinions and some reasons why I don't use Sony cameras, at least not now, but that's not to say they aren't right for you. A lot of people love Sony cameras, and when it comes to professional high-end and cinema cameras, they seem to be the king. As always, you need to decide what works for you in terms of what you need, and how you use it, and what you're used to. Also, what you can afford. So I hope my opinions help you make that decision in some way. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. Don't like or subscribe as usual, and I may see you on the next one.